Thank you all.
So
we're going to get started with our panel. Dave Anderson will be joining the panel really shortly. He's teaching a class right now. So, but we really wanted this panel to be an opportunity to be interactive, but also have our two guest speakers come and talk to you. So we have Heather Albanese and Scott Kupferman. They both work on campus, and we also work with them personally when they have students in their class, but they're also kind of the role models that even the videos kind of talked about of being good professors. You know, when Cynthia Barham was in the video of like what makes a good professor, I think definitely both Scott and Heather show that in their class every day and every semester. So this is going to be more interactive. They'll kind of give you a little bit of their background, and then we'll kind of open it up to some questions too. But thank you.
Okay. So again, I'm Heather Albanese. I'm an associate professor and chair of the sociology department here, and I teach a range of classes, but those include sociology of disability and a new class I taught this semester for the first time called sociology of the military, trauma, and disability. So kind of looking at, that's okay. I don't know. And so, you know, my interest in disability studies has a strong piece in terms of being interested in getting disability studies included in our curriculum on this campus. And so I've worked with some of the folks, and we now have both a graduate and undergraduate certificate in disability studies, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with disability studies as an interdisciplinary field that goes across the humanities, education, social sciences. And so I've been kind of interested in that aspect, but I'm also really interested in the experience of the access our students have to higher education. And I think these things kind of go hand in hand. I think if we don't have disability studies in the curriculum, then students with disabilities don't feel like they're reflected in what they're learning. And so I think it's extremely important. But also just the kind of access issues that Michael was talking about obviously are a huge part of that too. And I guess the one additional piece we can kind of talk about in the future that I've thought about a lot is kind of in my role as chair. I mean, one of the things I think is kind of going to be an ongoing challenge is that we have a university that's set up with increasing numbers of non-tenure track faculty, adjunct lecturers, and if we really care about these issues, we have to think about how we're going to resource getting, oh, come here.
Am I over there?
Yes, you're over here. Lucky, lucky. We'll let you go third. You don't introduce yourself. You can sit on either side. That we think about resources, that it's one thing to ask a tenure track professor, you know, let's make your class universally designed, or let's learn about this, or let's make it accessible. And another set of challenges when we have people being paid $2,500 a course with no supports, or instructors who are teaching 20 credits a semester, and what are our expectations, how do we best support those faculty members to really have accessible classrooms. So those are just some of the random things that I'm thinking about. Next.
Okay, thanks. So my name is Scott Kupferman. I am a assistant professor in the Department of Teaching and Learning in the College of Education. And so our department was special education and general education, but now we've merged into a inclusive education department where we teach future teachers how to teach all students. And so I teach our educational tech courses. I teach our special education courses. And in both courses, we have general ed and special ed teachers. And so something that I try to do in my courses is to really teach our future teachers how to provide access for students with disabilities, either formally documented disabilities, the broad range of supports, and so we'll talk a bit about that here. My background is a bit different. I started out as a high school special education teacher, a transition teacher, preparing students for life after school. And so after high school, what comes next? You know, college, getting a job. I've worked as a vocational rehab counselor, and so I'm a CRC, certified rehab counselor, and so in terms of what happens next, that career and job piece of it. I've worked as a coordinator of a disability service office and a assistive technology specialist on college campuses, and so both 2-year and 4-year, and so I kind of have that student service side too, and have gone through the whole OCR process. Some of the comments really kind of made me think back to the experiences I've had. And then I went back and got my PhD, which is really focused on special education and transition to post-secondary ed. So like my dissertation was focused on supporting students with psychiatric disabilities in college. I do a lot, this is my area in terms of my research, my service, and my teaching. And so something that I try to build into my classes as I think about our future teachers, how they can prepare and teach and provide access to students. So it's really my passion.
I'm Dave Anderson. I'm chair of the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry. I actually wear several hats on this campus, a lot of you know. I've been for a number of years the senior faculty associate to IT, so I sort of serve as a liaison between faculty and IT. Of course, then also work with the IT folks on their side of the accessibility issues. And then third, I'm the director of the Faculty Resource Center. And our center, as you know, provides resources for faculty for teaching in general. Our biggest focus is on online teaching and teaching with technology, so we have a very heavy focus in that area. But providing training for faculty of any sort, and if we need to train faculty how to create more accessible classroom or online items, we're ready to do that. We have a couple of different programs within the Faculty Resource Center to help faculty design online courses, and we help them design online courses to meet the Quality Matters standards. And one of the major standards in Quality Matters is accessibility. So we ensure that faculty members who design courses through these programs meet all those accessibility requirements in their online courses. We also have worked to make Blackboard itself have more accessibility information on there, so that individual faculty members don't have to do all those little pieces. And what else did I want to say? Yeah, and we're happy to provide training for. And some of these things are really fairly simple. Creating accessible Word documents is just using the right tools, and where the tools are all built into these Office products, and using the right tools. Creating accessible PowerPoint presentations, Excel spreadsheets, creating accessible web content, and we, again, happy to provide those kinds of training services, but coming back to what Heather was talking about, getting faculty to buy into this. And when I say that, exactly, our faculty, as the rest of the staff on this campus, are all overworked with the loads we have, and to put an additional burden on them is a difficult thing to do, to get them engaged in this. But my feeling is that for the most part, some of the things is just a little bit of a cultural shift. Just pay attention to that you're using headings or headers or these kinds of things in Word documents instead of just typing away. It's not a big change, but getting faculty aware of that and training them in those kinds of tools is what we'd like to do.
So maybe you guys can talk a little bit about one. I like that, how to get faculty engaged, because we do training and we do outreach as the DS office to new faculty. That's a small group, and then we put on trainings to kind of talk more about referring students to the right place, so that they know how to ask for accommodations and what's appropriate. But it's usually you three that are there at those things, and you already know that. So how?
Unless one of us is teaching them.
Yeah,
That's true.
and you can't make it. Then it's like a combination of you three. But we do have great faculty that are interested, and they do come. But like you said, there's a lot of adjunct. So what are some of your ideas on how to engage and really getting maybe more the provost and the administration to champion this cause, just like IT security or anything else. Like, no, it really is a requirement. So maybe some thoughts on that.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I've thought of, just because I'm also the chair of the LAS Online Fee Committee, which sounds riveting. It's just as exciting as it sounds. But, you know, one of the things I have noticed is that when we decided we want to have all these online programs and we want to have more online classes, that we set up basically a stipend structure to motivate that behavior, right? If we want to, and I think it's been relatively successful that we've gotten a lot more online classes and that we have again, some stipends that are available, and they're available to all levels of faculty, including lecturers. And I mean, I'm not saying that I know what that structure would look like, but I feel from my faculty as chair that it's not to expect them to go to all these extra things. Like I've talked to faculty at Pikes Peak Community College, and they have diversity training that's sort of built into their, like it's the week before classes start or whatever, it's built into their sort of pay structure, right? So it's something that's included. It's not like this extra thing we would like you to do for those who are super motivated, which you will not be compensated for.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that, but did you want to respond to
Yeah,
that?
yeah, that's, and that's right. I mean, I think we've made great strides in the College of Letters, Arts, and Sciences in getting faculty trained in online things in general, but certainly accessibility is a component of that, especially if they go through our programs in the Faculty Resource Center. A couple of other things. In fact, this came up in one of my other many meetings today, just a couple of hours ago, talking about this. You know, we are required to do sexual harassment training, and we're required to do security training, and we're required to do all these trainings, physical
Conflict
training,
of interest.
conflict of interest on Skillsoft. That's one way.
Yeah, if we value it, I mean, so you either have to pay for it or you require it, but I think that, Did you want to,
Well, but the other thing I was thinking, and this seems to be fairly effective, and Rachel knows this, we have monthly departmental meetings in our department, and every so often we have visitors from one area or another come in and talk about things, and that really is a good way to reach all the faculty members in a department. Because a lot of times, you know, we'll do things in the chairs and directors meeting and give this information to the chair, and it stops, and it just doesn't go any further. So engaging with all the faculty members in a department is a good way to do this. So come in with a presentation that says, see, this is how easy it is to do in Word, and this is how easy it is to do in PowerPoint, and just get them, you know, give them the idea of what it's going to take for them to create more accessible materials.
Although lecturers aren't necessarily included in department meetings, maybe they are.
Some,
so you're not necessarily capturing all of them, but I do think that.
But more of them that way.
Yeah.
Now that's a big effort.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to have to go in, you know, and spend a half hour or whatever,
Explaining to them.
getting a presentation to each of 17 departments in LAS, and I don't know how many departments in other colleges.
So faculty engagement is tough, and I've seen where the efforts can make a difference where it's kind of framed as good teaching. So I'm sure we'll get into this as the topic of a universal design for learning, how converting my material into a audio format rather than having it be a reactive accommodation, but how that can help all students, or how identifying key elements in a assignment proactively as like a summary or a outline for all students, how that can really benefit and just be good teaching. How I can provide various notes in class, and rather than a reactive note-taking accommodation, how that can be proactively beneficial to all students. So that approach to faculty engagement, and so the benefits for all of your students, not just that one student over the past 30 years, you might have one student who's blind come in, but how it can really benefit all of your students. I know I've mentioned this before, and I'm doing a presentation this summer at the HEAD conference, which is the National Association for Higher Ed and Disability, tied to faculty engagement, and it was a multi-state study that really looked at it, and the only actual long-term impact was tied to faculty evaluation in terms of their annual evaluation, not for them to be evaluated on how accessible their courses are, but how faculty can show those efforts as a part of their evaluation.
Oh, that's interesting.
And to have it be captured and to provide faculty examples of how part-time, non-tenure track, tenure track, and tenured faculty all go through their annual evaluations, what examples of making their course more accessible, how can they tie it into that? And that was kind of the only long-term rather than those professional, let's see, like communities, and so you'll get that same group of individuals, us. But,
Yeah.
so it's a really interesting topic.
Yeah, I like that too. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, we were talking about this yesterday in our meeting, and I know different departments do things in different ways, but that's something within my department for annual merit evaluation is easy for me to incorporate in the teaching evaluation component. I'm actually changing reappointment, promotion, and tenure criteria is a little harder, but it can be done if the department is motivated to do that.
And I mean, that goes back to your point, Dave, in terms of how we as a campus value accessibility as a part of teaching, and the same as the other trainings that we receive. And so access is something that as a campus we are held accountable for, obviously, through ADA, Section 508, 504, et cetera, and it's something that we should put into those evaluations.
Well, and speaking of yesterday, another thing that Scott mentioned yesterday is in the College of Education, they've created accessible templates for all kinds of things that faculty can use. So the template is all set up with instructions on how to use it, and it's just a matter of going in and putting in content. That's something that the Faculty Resource Center would be happy to help with as well, is creating those kinds of things.
I was just going to say, I know at Metro State University a few years ago, they incorporated this software, Read and Write Gold, text-to-speech software, and it has other things as study tools and all kinds of writing, assisting, all kinds of things. And what the Disability Services Center did there is they created a contest with a prize for 2 semesters long, and see which faculty members could incorporate the software into their classes, and in a way that promoted accessibility to everyone. And whoever created the most interesting and unique program and integrated it into their classrooms got a nice stipend. I remember that. And so they did have a lot of faculty participation in that. So.
Do you have budget for that item?
Well, our first
song
step
is to get a site license.
trying to get the software all over campus. That's our first step. So we are working with IT to really see the value of that software, not only for our diverse learners, but for everybody, because there's so many tools within that one program that. So right now we're trying to get more buy-in from the Writing Center or from different areas of why would you want this program?
Yeah. So,
and
but
would you
is the
use
goal
it?
to make it so all faculty would have access to it?
Yes,
Oh.
all faculty, staff, and students. So we'd also be able to load it on your own devices.
Private computers. Take
too.
home.
So that's our goal, but we kind of have to sell it to IT. So if you guys want to write letters of recommendation, we're open to those.
Okay.
I mean, that's a big deal because most campuses have their special assistive technology lab back over in the corner of a building, and so to really have that campus-wide access, and students without a formal documented disability, or in post-secondary ed, where students who don't necessarily want to out themselves as having a disability can still have access to that technology.
And we'd love it in all the Excel centers and things like that. So then it's like, I'm using this technology over here, but then when I go to the lab, you guys don't have it. So it's also something that would be all over campus, so they'd be used to it and have the opportunity to use those
So
tools.
I'm just looking at the price of this for an individual license. This is extremely expensive software.
It is.
Do they have
A site license is very expensive, but, and that's why we have to kind of sell it to IT.
And we're going to use tech fee money, basically, so we have to,
Yeah.
and I represent IT in the building. And I'm helping Ida with that sales pitch, and it's mainly so that we can say, hey, the English composition folks think this is a great idea, all you faculty think this is a great idea, and it just helps us justify using it, and also proves that all students would have access to it, which is key to using that tech fee money.
Yeah.
And if we can justify that to our leadership, then I think we're good to go. And another thing we've done, while I got the floor, is we've tried to take that disability software out of the DSO lab and also put it into all those general campus computers. And so if somebody wants to try Dragon, they can, or if they want to try JAWS to do some text-to-speech type stuff, they can, or they can just, experiment with the tools, and so they're available everywhere.
Give me the sticker shock. What is it? Is it
What's
an
the site
annual
license?
subscription?
Site license?
I don't
Yeah,
remember. What was it, 15 grand or
Something
something?
like that. It wasn't that bad.
Oh, that
I mean,
isn't that bad. I
And
really
for a
don't.
campus-wide
It's
site
not that
license,
bad.
No,
it's
it
not
isn't. No,
Yeah.
when you stop and think about library databases, and they'll pay $60,000 a year for one database.
And
Well,
this is
it's
sort
too
of-
expensive for us to
Yeah.
buy it, but, how do we then make it available to
Yeah.
all students to be able to utilize tech fee money? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And we just
and
make
Mike
it a
is
download
great
on our
with that.
website probably, if we got something like that, and then you have to register somehow, and we'd have to decommission it somehow when they left, that's the other challenge.
Well,
But we
the
can.
vendor doesn't require that.
Pardon me?
The vendor does not require that.
The decommissioning part?
Right.
Oh, good.
They say that's okay. Because the students and faculty, anyone can just take it home and put it on their own computers.
Yeah.
And I know the last institution I worked at, we had that, and staff members would approach me rather than going to the ADA coordinator like they're supposed to and say, you know what, I really need some help with reading. Don't we have something? And I'm like, yep, here it is. This is how you use it. Because there are a lot of people who need help with.
It seems like this would be an easy sell at that price point if you stop and think, if you hired one full-time employee to try to provide the kind of services that this one piece of software,
Yeah.
you couldn't hire somebody.
Right.
And that's awesome, but everybody's got to see that it's awesome. And that's why, our leadership just needs a quick demo. I think once they see it, they'll realize the tool's even, helpful for them, or us, or, just helping us write better is just a good thing, right?
Yeah.
So it's a good tool. And I don't want to comment on Dave's point about the evaluations. We've added it to our staff evaluations.
Okay.
And it's been amazing how much it's made everybody more aware, right? It's just, it's a requirement from the top level that we need to consider ADA when we buy software, when we configure systems, when we build systems. And, we're not perfect at it, and we haven't gone and executed all the wonderful things yet, but we're talking about it, and we're aware of it. And I think that's a good first start. So that at least the conversation's happening during coaching sessions and during final evals and during the planning process, where we try to think through that variable when we start doing things, because sometimes we go so fast that we just kind of forget that. And now we're really kind of making ourselves think about that every time we do anything, which I think is a good idea.
And I also like the idea, because we do a lot at the department level, and we have our own criteria, but I think having it be something, if it was coming from the provost, where, I know recently leadership got added as part of as a sort of separate component. It's possible to change sort of the top-down criteria, and I think that could also be useful, as opposed to waiting for every department to kind of get on board. I think that might be
From the facilities point of view, they're very self-aware now, and when we do construction, we talk a lot about that, and we, in the village of Alpine Valley, you probably don't know this, but we dropped all the light switches down to 42 inches as opposed to 48, which is a good thing. You'll find that our stand-up podium's not accessible, but our wall-mounted ones are. They're lower, and the controls are at 48 inches, and they're into the wall, so they're only 4 inches out. So we're all getting aware of all these numbers and these measurements, and it's kind of been fun, When we sit in these OAC meetings, these big high-level management meetings about these projects, these topics come up all the time.
Can I build upon that quickly? So in terms of purchasing and our campus commitment, so vendors are trying to make it easier with a VPAT, a voluntary product accessibility template, which are not necessarily always correct or accurate. And so And so, let's see, I'm a part of I'm a national group of let's see, vendors and individuals with disabilities who co-evaluate technology. And it's amazing how inaccurate a VPAT is in terms of Section 508 and beyond, and as the federal laws are being reauthorized to be even broader. And so as a campus, so we need to kind of look beyond those standards or those kind of prepared packages to help us buy technology, to really look at access and get student feedback and staff and faculty feedback, because a VPAT can only go so far, and there's some issues with that when it's self-developed and provided by a vendor. And so maybe that's something that we can talk more about too.
Sure, and I think, you know, we should have that as a purchasing variable, right? It's got to have a checkbox that says, is it ADA compliant? That would be the first step. And we need that help in the PSC, because they buy lots of big contract stuff. And we do have a strategic purchasing guy that we met with recently on IT stuff, and we did say to him, what we can use some help with is understanding those VPACs and or understanding what this vendor can provide us as far as ADA accessibility. But, you know, a confusing thing for me is there are so many disabilities out there, you know, how do you put your arms around all of it, right? I got the blind, I got the deaf, I got, you know, there's all kinds of different variables which is above me, so having that additional support and help and interpreting all that would be helpful too.
Absolutely. It's just kind of piqued my interest when you were talking about it, but maybe it's just jumping ahead to design and that sort of thing. But you had mentioned about actually framing things in as good teaching practices, and especially not just, you know, serving one person, but as a general rule, this is what's good for students, things like that. So maybe you could talk a little bit about your experience doing that, maybe at your where you used to work before, and how you spread the word about that kind of stuff, or if you incorporated it into your education, like curriculum, you know, the courses that you teach, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and so it's something that we all can, I'm sure, talk to. And so I basically start off with each of my assignments or material and look at what that fundamental purpose is. And so the fundamental alteration is a big concept. And so if I'm trying to teach a concept, but however a student can tell me their understanding of that concept, that gives me some flexibility, compared to if I'm trying to see if they can write a 5-page essay, and the purpose of that assignment is for them to write that 5-page essay. I can't have them do a presentation. I can't have them tell me in a different way how they understand that concept. And so I look at what the purpose of that assignment is, and then to provide the range of options. And so either how I provide information, and so rather than pure lecture, and so do I have graphic representations, do I have a text description, a audio format, proactively, and so how I provide information to my students in the most, broad range as possible, unless the purpose of that assignment is for them to understand directly what I'm lecturing, but typically it's not. And then I look at, for their assignments, does it need to be a timed, hour-long assignment, typically, or quiz? Typically not. And so I don't have time restrictions on my assignments, and that can proactively address common accommodation in terms of extended time, either double time or time and a half for exams. I don't necessarily care if they take it in class or they can take it home and work on, and so that reduces the need for a quiet environment for taking that test. I provide it in multiple formats, and so just thinking about what's my purpose for that assignment, and then if it doesn't fundamentally alter that purpose, how can I provide more options proactively?
Yeah, and I would say my process of thinking about universal design for learning is sort of the kind of parallels that in some ways, that it made me really think about to question each of the pieces, like why would we assume a test should be done in an hour and 15 minutes? What is the value added of making it done that time? So And so kind of to question, and also how students show that they've learned something, like that there's kind of there's sort of a power dynamic between professors and students, and you can kind of ask yourself the question of what does it mean to give students more choices and how they demonstrate what they know, as opposed to me having sort of all the power. And so I think that there's some kind of interesting questions that get brought up by UDL that have helped me kind of rethink my teaching and how I present the material, you know, how it's represented, and something for my online class, which I was really glad the Faculty Resource Center was able to do for me, was to have all my lectures captioned for a social theory class. And just so many students have said how much they like it, and these are not deaf or hard of hearing students. It helps them so much. And I actually don't think I appreciated how much it would help them until afterwards, right? So it was one of these things where I think often we want professors to wait till they have a student who needs a specific accommodation, and then very quickly kind of try to retrofit the class. And that pressure, I think it doesn't serve the students well, nor the professors well. I think it makes faculty kind of stressed and trying to, it seems, whereas if you kind of design it correctly from the beginning and think about, okay, I'm going to have this online class, I want my lectures to have these kinds of different ways of representing the material, it's not, and to have supports for them to create the class like that, I actually think it just works a whole lot better, and I think that should be the kind of thinking again about the universal and universal design. That this is not for just a handful of students with disabilities. This is for everybody, and I think the software examples are a piece of that. Do you want?
I've been teaching for 35 years. And for a significant portion of that time, I had a pile of handwritten lecture notes and a piece of chalk. That was it, a chalkboard. And then once every week or two, I'd hand out an exam, and they get it done in an hour and 15 minutes, and that's all we did. So you're right. I mean, and this applies to not only you know, the ADA compliance and disabilities, but you know, multiple learning modalities and things like that. Just being more flexible with how we present information and how we have students learn that information and practice those skills and demonstrate them to us. But maybe for the moment, I'll sort of flip that around and talk about some of the challenges. You know, we're all concerned about getting our textbook orders in early enough so that, but there's a lot of them. I mean, the textbook I'm using now, sure I have a hard copy, but we're using an online version as well, is not even accessible to me. It's the most horribly done. It's not an e-book where it has all sorts of features. It is just an image, and worse yet,
it's a photograph? It's like
it's just like it's just a PDF image of each chapter at a time. And worse yet, every single little symbol, Greek symbol, math symbol, anything like that, is in there as an image without any alt tag or anything. I mean, when I do something like I want to copy and paste so I can put it on a document, I can put it under the document camera, work things out by hand. Anytime I copy one of those symbols, it puts in a .jpg. Come on, publishers, you need to help us out with some of these efforts too, with making these textbooks more available, more accessible.
I do think that faculty probably don't appreciate how, if we could kind of pressure publishers. I know that the DS offices try to talk to publishers, and sometimes individual faculty do after they have kind of had this identified, but I do think that it's possible that faculty could pressure publishers to have.
Absolutely, as faculty become more aware of
if they became, I mean, it doesn't help
I'm not going to adopt your textbook because
because if you had another choice, maybe you could pick a different,
There are some national efforts to work with publishers to get multiple formats, and let's see, last I saw there was a bill in the House that I think got stalled in terms of accessible instructional materials and publishers and the role and commitment of publishers. Otherwise,
because of lobby groups from publishers?
yeah, and so it's been a couple of months since I last saw a update, but it is a national dialogue too. And I mean the conversion of our instructional materials, even like handouts and other non-textbook material, is something that's tough, especially as we pick material the night or a couple hours before class to show, or as emerging content. It all can't be prepared or given several weeks before the semester starts, and as we incorporate new content to really engage our students,
Yeah.
it's tough.
Yeah, and related, there's the time thing. I think there's also sort of the legality thing that I think what a lot of professors should do, faculty do, like, oh, let's photocopy 3 chapters out of this book and put it online. And then when we ask disability services to, can you, scan this and make it screen readable, it's like, sometimes we run into kind of legal copyright issues. And that's a mess, because I know the faculty want to keep doing what they're doing. The same thing when they want to show YouTubes or any movies that aren't captioned or whatever. So I don't have a great solution to that, but I think unfortunately what can sometimes be the fallout of that is that the professors get frustrated with the students with disabilities because they're screwing it up for how they want to teach with basically illegal materials. And I don't have any solution for that, but I think it's unfortunate that that kind of gets discovered or whatever in this process, as opposed to, I don't know, if there was some other way of doing it. I'm not sure.
No, I think you bring up a good point, because that happens a lot. And then it's, well, I only have one student.
Yeah.
Why do I have to pick the book that doesn't have all these great tools within it? And now I'm, not really helping everybody else that could use all these great tools. I have that one blind student that can't use those. Well, can't they just use something else? And, trying to go back to, well, this is civil rights law. Like, you wouldn't do the same with race or age or anything else. And, but that doesn't really, isn't really the way to go with faculty, because then they think you're just, barking at them. And so we try to take an approach where it's, what is best for students, but what's also helpful. I think the video that was shown by Lena about the thermoform and using that really shows the process that some of these things that, our office is trying to help faculty with is a long process. Like, we can't find out, the day before that you want to use this great map, because that student is going to be then behind, because it's going to take time. So, picking materials ahead of time so that we can make them accessible. But now, next year he can use all of those.
I was thinking that he could use it with students who aren't visually
exactly.
It could be something everyone gets to.
Yeah, so we're excited to be able to kind of show faculty just different ways that will help all students. And then you gain these materials that, it was rough the first time. But just like anybody else, a student with a disability can decide the day before that they're going to take that class. And we have to try to make it accessible.
The week after, they might change classes. Or
yes.
Since other students do that, they should also be able to do it.
So it's all of those dynamics. And I think, Scott, you're right about trying to, push to say, we're not going to buy your software or your book as a collective national group if you don't make these standards. But it's easy for Google or Amazon to push something out and not make it accessible, because they'll make money from the masses. But how much better that product would be if they just took a little bit more time and held off and really made it accessible to everybody. But it's a slow process, but I'm glad, that there is a national push too, to kind of help support that, and it's not just our voice of one student taking some type of class here at UCCS. Like, that doesn't really impact it's nationally, this has to change.
And I mean, how you define access. And so one thing that might be accessible to one student might be non-accessible to another. And so it's really about multiple options and providing, a variety of ways that students can engage. And I mean, you see that, it goes back to the whole universal design approach, where like the door handles compared to the balls type, you could open them when you're carrying different things, but also it's easier to grasp, or like the fire alarms where it has a strobe if you have your headphones in, as well as if you're a individual who's deaf or hard of hearing. It has multiple ways of informing you, visually, through audio. But so access is let's see, we obviously have to follow a certain set of guidelines which are changing and being reauthorized and expanded, and so access is tough to define, and so the real key is multiple options. And as faculty, I mean, that's something that we can do to enrich how we teach as well, and provide more access for students who don't have a formal disability, but they still need to connect with that content. And so it's really that key.
Yeah, one of the things, and actually you gave this as an example, which I like, is that you can, when you have students do projects for your class, whether they're multimedia projects or PowerPoints, or they're presenting class, if you have small seminar type classes like that, you can be talking to them about universally designing their presentations and that kind of thing. So you can kind of sneak it in, right? So as like a teaching moment where you're disseminating the, and I think a whole range of students can learn about sort of how they become better learners if they get exposed to some of these, like, oh, when I use the closed caption stuff, or, text where you can, I also like to be able to cut and paste text out of what I'm teaching to put in handouts and stuff, and have students be able to use bookmarks, or, I think a lot of students actually are already doing this, but they like the obviously more screen readable materials.
Yeah, I like that idea. I hadn't thought of that, having the students in our capstone courses who be writing assignments and PowerPoint presentations to encourage them to make those products accessible.
And actually tied into your grading of those assignments in terms of they're thinking about access. And I mean, that's something that I might need to do teaching our future teachers, the College of Ed.
It's a good fit, yeah.
But so beyond that, and so it's something that we can incorporate into our own assessment of our students.
And then maybe the instructor in that course will actually learn how.
Yeah. But I also think it would have the students go through the same process that we go through as teachers, like, what is the most important, what are the really key concepts here, how can I explain this in multiple ways to make sure everyone's getting it, and I think some of us do that intuitively to make it a more conscious process, and then have the students think, okay, if I'm going to present my research project on X, how, as opposed to getting up there, like this kind of nightmare, just to have them be thinking about these things ahead of time, that sort of multiple ways of presenting the materials.
Just kind of a comment, like when we think about what accessibility is, and you need, you were needing to be guided. I recently bought a house, and there's a ramp in the front. Well, it says on the listing it's wheelchair accessible. Well, I actually have it, but I'm having someone come and break down part of the wall to the bathroom, because the bathroom is like this way, the door is this way, but I want the house. It's kind of funny, like how you just have this really shallow perception of what is something, and then you have no idea. Your example of fire alarm with strobe lights versus just hearing and that kind of thing, and just sort of thinking through. But really, people may just do one little thing, they think it's enough, and it's really, there's so much more to that. So.
Yeah, I love the way you think of, I'm sorry, I just wanted to add too, I love your concept of universal design. It's making me think a little differently about all this, because you're talking about just making a better product for the sake of a better product, not to necessarily target on a specific bunch of people. And I think it's a great way to look at it, quite frankly. So I should make accessible podia because it's good for short, tall, whatever. Anybody wants to use it, or a decent piece of software, or accessible documents. The other thing, operating systems now have a lot of this built in, which is wonderful. And I spend a lot of time showing everybody on my iPhone how I can read the paper without having to read it, because it just talks to me. And I think that's cool, and I think that's something everybody can potentially use, especially when they're driving or busy, or their hands are busy, or they're working out, or whatever. So that's a great way to look at it. I like that.
And what's maybe about 5 to 7 years ago, you used to see the whole Bobby approved, which was like a seal of approval that this meets certain accessibility standards, and that's really gone away for a real good reason, because let's see, after you get that seal of approval, effort just kind of seemed to stop. And access should be something that we should revisit, and it's always evolving, changing, and let's see, as Dave mentioned, in terms of like our College of Education has a syllabus template that is accessible, and so we're really trying to encourage beyond just that syllabus. Let's even get further into, or put our efforts more so into the weekly activities rather than just something that you do at the very beginning. I'm at the start of the semester and then kind of forget about. And so how can you build it in more, what small steps can you do each week? Can you, using the built-in text-to-speech to MP3 file process in Max, can you convert your materials into audio files each week and put those into Blackboard? Or what kind of smaller but more frequent steps can faculty use beyond just let's make a syllabus and then kind of forget about it? And so it's more of the active thinking about rather than, I've met that standard, and hopefully something that we can tie into like quality matters.
Yeah, because I was thinking that that checkbox actually makes me really nervous. Because I know I have students using Blackboard where it's not accessible, and I didn't find it out until after, like, you used like the lockdown browser. I didn't know that wasn't accessible until well.
If perhaps you don't know the settings, but we've worked with Lena, it is accessible.
So in terms of changing the font size?
The student can do that.
Okay, because, the students, maybe it's also a problem on their part. They know how to change the font size when they weren't locked in browser, and then they told me after the test that they weren't able to do that.
They have to change their browser resolution. Then
before
change it. So yeah, if you're on a 27-inch iMac with Retina display, that's super high resolution in lockdown browser. The print will look very tiny, but they can reduce that resolution, then go into lockdown browser. But yeah,
I think that the disconnect, because I didn't know that, so I wasn't able to tell them that ahead of time. And then they're in a test, right? And so I'm like, and I find out afterwards. And so,
And that's also good point. Learning opportunity.
Yes.
That if you're going to use a tool like Lockdown Browser, we recommend a no stakes, 3-question quiz. This guy is what? And that way they're going to run into those issues so we can troubleshoot them before they hit something.
Yes.
They're being great.
And this is a student who, like the one who, he needed to make the font bigger, but he actually isn't registered with Disability Services, so it was one of these things where he hadn't run into that problem because he was able to make things bigger himself, and then when he runs into it, he wasn't. So.
Right. And if more people are aware and know how to do it on their own, then there's
if I knew anything about it,
directing the Disability Services, well, you could have had that resolved if you just worked with this or that. So.
And I think another thing that you can always tell your students, and I hope this is your policy too, is that the best thing to do is if you run into an issue at the beginning of a test, to say, I cannot take this test because it's not accessible to me, and stop then and there. Because it's very difficult legally to help someone who's already taken it and said, well, I didn't get a very good grade, but it wasn't accessible. It's really hard. Puts the DSO in a very difficult position, whereas if they stop, and the professors, and say, I can't do this test at this point with this material or with this soft, whatever, ahead of time, and give them permission to say that, or let them know that that's an option. If there's some reason,
it's not working.
then stop immediately and say, nope. It's not going to work. I'd have to get this resolved that way. Then we can arrange with the testing center and say, okay, you can test it here, and we'll get all those things fixed first. Yeah, because I think so many come after the fact, and then that's an issue.
It was definitely very frustrating, like after the fact, because
so that's hard. It'd be good to remind them. But I think Scott brings up what you were listening to, and the good fact that all the teachers, I mean, that's part of your training, is like, we have to teach, what do they call it, UDL, for multiple ways of engagement, multiple ways of presentation, whatever the 3 are, but everybody gets that teaching.
Well, and so it's worthwhile to note that our training as faculty oftentimes doesn't involve like pedagogy.
What-
So
At
how
all.
to teach.
Yeah, what training? No, we're
We've
not,
never gotten
yeah.
any
Wow.
training.
Yeah.
So there's no pedagogy training?
No, not really, yeah.
And so
Yeah,
'Cause
maybe
I
in
always
education,
bring
because
that
you're
up.
teaching teachers, but for the, like, in chemistry, whatever, you're not taught,
That's
you're
too
just,
bad.
and I also think that that relates to some of the, kind of, what I think is my own narrow mind, is like, when I think about people who are successful in colleges, especially traditionally, and go on and get their PhDs, they tend to be, you know, people who are good at listening passively to a
Pedagogy.
lecture, writing down every word, and then reproducing it in very specific ways, like a 3-hour essay test, right? So you're selecting off those people who learn that way, and then having them teach what you hope at some point will be a broader group, but if you think about that as an access thing, you can see why you're selecting on those folks who learn in very traditional ways. Because if you were the A student in college, you go on to graduate school, and then you were the A, you know, so that's part of the problem is we don't, I think, and of course there's some variations, it's not like all professors learn the same style, but I do think that there is that skew.
Yeah, that hit the nail on the
Yeah,
head.
because we were all the A students in high school. Obviously that's why we're here, right? So.
Unlike the faculty in the College of Education, that's the-
You guys can actually learn how to teach it.
in chemistry, you have a PhD in chemistry, you can teach chemistry. That's it. That's the only qualification you need to have is a PhD in chemistry. And none of us have ever had any kind of training whatsoever. When I first started teaching, I just modeled my teaching after my favorite professor. And I think that was a good thing because
Yeah,
it gave
yeah.
me a good job. But I have taken the initiative to go to all kinds of, conferences and workshops and learn about these things. But some other faculty, this is the way I do it, and I'm not going to change.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Well, we've reached our time. Do you guys have any, like, one last
Brilliant.
nugget of thought that you'd like to share with us, or?
Well, I mean, I hope these are kind of ongoing conversations. One thing I will mention, I know Scott and I are going to present some UDL stuff at the Knapsack Institute this summer. And again, I don't know if you're familiar with the Knapsack Institute, but I think more of that kind of stuff would be helpful, whereas faculty can be thinking about being inclusive and trying to think about barriers to access in their classes that they don't know what they don't know. But I don't know. Did you have any last thought?
Just in terms of how fortunate we are as a campus to have the Faculty Resource Center and the Disability Services Office, and I'd love to see more collaboration because as faculty, our place is Faculty Resource Center for developing our coursework and teaching, and so we're fortunate to have that type of support, and so the more resources can go to the Faculty Resource Center and the Disability Service Office really as that proactive place rather than the reactive accommodations, but so just, yeah, if I want to see more, it's been nice to have this opportunity.
I have one thing that stuck with me from our last meeting with Jean Muir. It just really, I thought was so profound. And she said, we have to stop thinking about this as accommodation, but think about it as accessibility for all. And I was asking Wayne, so what's with the Disability Services Office? Shouldn't that be renamed the Accessibility Services Office?
That's a whole nother.
Yeah.
We're actually, there is research out there where it's actually good to have a real clear named office for students to go seek out, because in post-secondary ed, it's not our campus commitment to go find students. Students have to go find and go request for services, and so it's actually beneficial. And I've seen all different types of names for offices, and it always pops up on the national DISHY listserv. I'm thinking about changing my office name, but it always comes back to having really
We've gone
clearly
through
labeled.
that conversation, and it's really
The pendulum is
more
going
of a
back.
It just seems to me
Philosophically.
that, and I get the access for students to recognize it easily, but it just seems like there's stigma associated.
Well, there is, but I
with
think it's
disability.
also, what is our role as disability services? Our role is not, unfortunately, what we do, is to try to fix all these problems, but that's really not our role. Our role is to serve the student that is asking for the accommodation, and that's it. but we get into all these other pockets because that need is not being filled from other places. So we've kind of stepped in roles that we shouldn't be.
Welcome to my world.
And I think that also underscores the sort of the downside of an individual accommodation model versus is that it tends to be expensive, resource expensive, and I'm not saying we shouldn't have that, but I think that the sort of effort and cost of that would reduce somewhat if we had more universally designed classes.
Yes.
Right, so it wouldn't be, but
Yeah.
So we'll always need some
we
type
always
of
need that, yeah.
those really individualized accommodations. There can never and should never be the absence of that type of offers. I mean,
Right.
there's
Oh,
always
I
the
understand
cases
that.
for individual accommodation.
But in some campuses, they have an accessibility center in addition to the disability services office, and the accessibility, like an accessibility initiative center, which concentrates on trying to make the entire campus accessible and universally designed, the learning, the construction, everything, and the IT and all that. And it's separate from disability services, which concentrates on accommodating the individual student with exceptional problems because of the barriers that haven't been taken care of.
You can always go with the model that the Bethel College is using, a name that's like a paragraph long.
Yeah.
Put it all in there. Put it all in there.
Mary and Arthur and,
Yeah. So my last comment is this federal investigation on the Boulder campus, I think turned out actually to be a good thing because it's opened a lot of eyes and it's gotten conversation started on this campus as well, and we've been able to, between their policy and some of the other resources that they've gathered, we've been able to borrow off of that and create our own. So it's good the conversation is really growing a lot on this campus.
I agree. I mean, I've been here for a long time, but I think even just in the last 3 years, I've seen so much movement and other people like Jean Durr and legal counsel, coming into these conversations where it is at a higher level than, one faculty or one staff member saying, and trying to shout it out there. Even just this group. So I appreciate you guys as a panel to come and educate us more. So thank you.